Hi everyone, this is a short lesson on socialism. It's lesson 1 that we're covering in class this week. So for those students who have not been able to attend this lesson, I'm doing a small video lesson on what has been covered in class. So in this lesson, what I'm going to do is to give you a little bit of the kind of historical development of socialism. So as homework for this week, I've asked you to look at a documentary called Heaven on Earth, Socialism Part 1. And it kind of builds up on that documentary. So a lot of people think that socialism starts with Karl Marx and communism, but actually it goes a little bit more back, and socialism is not only connected to communism or revolutionary socialism. So we're following the Edexcel exam board, and what I'll be going through today is a bit of the historical development of socialism, the 3 different strands, which the curriculum covers, and some of the core ideas and principles of socialism. So I had a little starter activity in class today. So there are, on this starter, you will find different keywords, different concepts, and 5 of these belong to socialism. So what I want you to do is to spend around a minute, and just see whether you can pick out the 5 that belongs to socialism. So you can stop the video and I will tell you in a bit. Okay, so the 5 core ideas and principles of socialism is, first of all, really important, is equality. Now we've looked at liberalism, and liberalism, the core principle is really liberty. So regardless what strand of liberalism you belong to, one of the things, your main goal is to achieve freedom, liberty. When it comes to socialism, we can say that their main goal is equality. This was how socialism started. So while liberalism was a reaction to absolutism and came as a result of the Enlightenment era, socialism is linked to the Industrial Revolution and capitalism and the inequality between social classes, especially the proletariat, the working class, and the bourgeoisie, so those who owned the means of production, that class struggle and the inequalities we saw, increasing in society because of this class struggle is what socialism is founded upon. It's about bringing about equality. However, what you will find is when we look at the different strands of socialism, and there's 3 in this case, so we're going to look at revolutionary socialism, we are going to look at social democracy, and we are going to look at Third Way, which is associated with Tony Blair and New Labour. What you will see is the type of equality that they try to achieve is different. So if we look at revolutionary socialism, they want to have absolute equality. They want to make sure that everyone has the same and there's no inequality in society, and especially when we talk about economic terms. So if we look at social democracy or democratic socialism, they do believe that some inequality is going to be there. However, they want to try to minimize the inequality, rather than creating absolute equality. And then you got the Third Way, who accepts that there is inequality, and all they're aiming to do is creating equal opportunities for people. And whether they then, you know, take on these opportunities is up to the individual. So quality is really important. The second one is social class. And it's not because socialists want to create social class. It is that because of social class, especially the struggle between the working class and the bourgeoisie, this is how the ideology developed. So it's the struggle between social classes which created, yeah, this ideology. Then we've got collectivism. And collectivism here is very much related to how the economy should be organized. We can say that socialism actually started off as being a critique against capitalism and the inequalities there. And one way to solve it, as we will look at when we talk about Karl Marx and communism, is through collectivism. And collectivism, in its kind of more extreme form, means that all industries, the whole economy, is publicly owned. And people all own, yeah, the means of production, and what's being produced is being shared equally among everyone. And then you have form of collectivism, which is not as extreme as that. But if we look at democratic socialists, they tend to go for kind of a mixed economy. So some industries being owned by the state, by the public, and then others, the majority, being in the hands of private businesses. So typically they would aim for collectivism when it comes to utilities such as gas, electricity, coal, steel industry, the railways, that those should be owned by the public. Okay. Common humanity is also core idea and principle of socialism. And it links very much to how socialists view human nature. So we know that liberals, yeah, if you remember liberalism, liberals have a positive view on human nature. Yeah, individuals are rational beings. We're capable of learning from our mistakes and from growing and developing. If we look at conservatism, though, they have a very pessimistic view of human nature being competitive, being greedy, being, you know, very focused on self-interest. When it comes to socialism, they've got a positive view. So like liberalism, they are what we call progressive ideologies. Yeah, they've got a positive view on human nature, and they also look at how we would like society to be. They believe that we humans are social animals and we thrive best, yeah, are really kind of the nature of our human nature is that we are like to work together with others. We're cooperative. We enjoy working in groups. We're social animals, yeah. And with common humanity is built upon that view. That we see from a social perspective, you would see that all individuals are interdependent of each other, and we have an interest in other people's life. We see like we are part of a big unit. We are part of the same common humanity because we're human beings. Then the last one is workers' control. And what do we mean? That we mean that it simply means that workers should be in control of their own labor, of their own what they produce. Now this can take on different forms. So if we look at revolutionary socialism, workers would be in full control of their labor. So we were talking about full workers control is where all the workers own, yeah, and control the production of a factory, for instance. They make decisions together in terms of how many hours should be worked, when they should be worked, when there should be free days, what should be produced, and so on. And then you got the various levels, degrees of workers' control. So what we, for instance, have seen in the UK is how different unions, think about the teacher unions, for instance, how they provide workers and teachers with some level of control, influence in the work that they do. So it comes, through different degrees. So those are, in a nutshell, the 5 core ideas and principles of socialism. But in the next lesson, we're going to go deeper into those. But today is just about providing you with an overview of socialism. Now, I ask you to look through this documentary, which you can watch on YouTube, which is Heaven on Earth, Socialism Part 1. And I would assume that quite a lot, many of you might think that socialism started with Karl Marx, but it did actually a little bit before that. And one of the founding fathers was actually Robert Owen, who was a Welsh. He came from Wales. He was a textile manufacturer. He managed a mill in Scotland and became quite wealthy. But what he saw, what happened, so this is during the Industrial Revolution, and socialism emerges as a reaction to that. What Robert Owen saw was a huge inequality between the working class and those who owned the factories and owned the mills. Workers were treated badly, long working hours, poor working conditions. And he Yeah, I'm sorry, it's breaking up a little bit. So from my end here. So capitalism, the Industrial Revolution, really created this inequality, and he wanted a more egalitarian society. So he was quite wealthy. And what he did in 1825, he went actually to America and he bought a town in America called Harmony, which he then renamed New Harmony. And he set up this kind of utopian experiment, socialist experiment here. He created this utopian community where people would share resources, children would not work, they would actually put into schooling, so big emphasis on education. There was communal living, people sharing tasks, there was greater gender equality. And it really kind of built upon socialist principles. The idea was that people would do the work according to their capabilities. They would put in the work that they could, and they would also get back according to what they put in. But they wouldn't do that in terms of money. It was credits, so that the shops in New Harmony, they could go there with the credits and they could get stuff from that. So it was more of an exchange kind of market rather than a free market capitalism. It did collapse, it failed, so it only lasted for 2 years. But it was kind of the first kind of real kind of socialist experiment, and that's why Robert Owen is seen as being kind of the founding father, even though we saw kind of examples of socialism earlier back in the days during the feudal times in Britain as well. Now, and this is where Karl Marx comes in. So Robert Owen isn't one of the key thinkers in the curriculum. However, when you write your essays and you write your introduction, it's always good to put a little bit of historical context, and the examiners, would be really impressed if you're also able to mention other key figures. Also, by not talking about Robert Owen and some of the other political figures that I'll be talking about, it doesn't really complete the whole story of socialism by just focusing on the 5 key thinkers within the textbook. But Karl Marx is one of the key thinkers of the textbook, and rightly so, because he very much influenced socialism, and he is obviously connected and affiliated with what we call and refer to as communism. So Karl Marx, a German philosopher who lived from 1818 to 1883. Now, Karl Marx, so he was born a little bit later than Robert Owen, and he had some criticism around Robert Owen's utopian community. He wasn't against kind of some of the things he tried to implement in New Harmony, but he said that actually if you only have a small community that is surrounded still by the free market capitalism, eventually free market capitalism will just get in there, and remove that community. He said, if we really want socialism, then what needs to happen? We need to have a complete overthrow of capitalism, everywhere, get rid of capitalism, and we need to move into what he called a socialist, a communist society. Now for him, this is where social class comes in. Socialism was about the struggle between the laboring class, the proletariat, and the owners of the means of production, the bourgeoisie. And this struggle between the classes would inevitably result in revolution, according to him. Now, how does that happen? Let's first have a look at the next slide. So Karl Marx really studied, the history of humankind. So he looked at the history and he identified that if we look at the history, we can see that humankind had gone through several power struggles between a few different classes. So he talks about 5 stages, and the 5th stage is socialism, communism, and this is the end of history. So the first stage that human kind had gone through is what he called primitive communism. So this is kind of in the early days, the simple communities in which property was shared and there was no concept of individual possessions. Then we moved into the so-called slave society, in which there were 2 distinct social classes that emerged, and that was the slave owners and the slaves. Then slavery was abolished, and then we moved into feudalism. And here again, there was a struggle between 2 classes. So we had the landowners who owned the land and they ruled over the serfs. Then the stage that Karl Marx said that we were in at the time when he was alive was capitalism. And what he saw here was the bourgeoisie class who owned the means of production. You had them on one hand, and the other hand, you had the proletariat or the working class who sold their labor for wages and were alienated from the product of their labor. Now he says socialism will rise. And how will socialism rise? That is, according to him, when the proletariat becomes so conscious about them being part of a working class and they're starting to identify themselves with being the working class. And they're being so oppressed by this inequality and poor working conditions and inequality that they see, that they will together, there will be this class consciousness among the proletariat. They will rise up and create a revolution which will overthrow capitalism. Now, for a while, there will be a so-called proletariat dictatorship, where the proletariat has taken over the bourgeoisie. And once the bourgeoisie are kind of educated into a new, this new socialism, the state would basically wither away, according to Karl Marx. So, and everyone would own the means of production, and we would have absolute equality through collectivism, and where the products, the fruit of the labor is shared equally among people. It's interesting because what he envisioned, communism, at the end, is actually anarchy, There's no state, there's no government. Everyone owns the means of production and equally shared. So obviously it's very different to what we've seen with the Soviet Union, with Lenin and Stalin. You know, if we look into the theory, that was not Marxism. Okay, so Karl Marx is mentioned in, and is a really important key thinker as part of your curriculum. However, the next one here is not a key thinker, not one of the 5 key thinkers. However, he's really, really important to mention to really understand the story. And what you need to remember, and try to show this in your essays, yeah, show that the ideologies, yeah, and the strands within the ideology kind of changes as society changes. And what happens here is that you know, working conditions slowly started to improve. And this is where democratic socialism developed. So Edward Bernstein, he was became a friend of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And he was, you know, a supporter of Marxism. However, he started to distance himself from Marx's kind of revolutionary ideas. He wanted a socialist society as well, but he believed that the conditions of the working class had improved under capitalism, and that therefore there wouldn't be this big class consciousness among the proletariat, which would make them rise up and cause a revolution. As well, remember that in the late 19th century, we also see how in the Western countries, how parliamentary democracy started to develop, and how workers, yeah, got the right to vote. We only need to go back to, we can look at the UK. It was in 1884 when farm workers and miners got the right to vote. So obviously there was an opportunity for workers to not only raise their voice, but there was an opportunity for socialist political parties to emerge and try to get socialist reform through via the parliamentary system. And that's what Edward Bernstein believed in. He believed in evolutionary socialism or gradualism, so that we can bring about progress and social reform bit by bit by using, yeah, the political system that was becoming more democratic. So democratic socialism, there's different terms for it used. One of them is also socialism through the ballot box, is another one. Evolutionary socialism, yeah, they all kind of mean the same thing to a large degree. Okay, next one we're going to look at is Beatrice Webb. So she is one of the key thinkers that you need to know of in the curriculum. Now, she was an English sociologist, economist, socialist, and labor historian. And what she was most famous for, together with her husband, was founding the so-called Fabian Society, which has still got links to the Labour Party and still exists today. Now, she founded the Fabian Society in 1884, and what she wanted to do was a bit like Edward Bernstein, so she builds upon him, is to create parliamentary socialism. Now, the key term that you need to remember when it comes to her, and you should mention in your essays in the exam, is the inevitability of gradualness, is what she's talking about. That we can establish socialism peacefully by passing democratic reforms through existing parliamentary institutions. And political action required the formation of a socialist party which would compete for power. Now, Beatrice Webb did also help with founding the Labour Party in 1900. And the idea is, workers having the right to vote since 1884. It's at least farm workers and miners. And then later in 1918, all men over 21 got the right to vote. Obviously, you had women getting the right to vote in 1918. And then in 1928, all women over the age of 21, so equal to men, got the right to vote in the UK. But these changes, gave the option and possibility, the view that we could create socialism by using the parliamentary system. Yeah, so forming the Labour Party, get them into power, and then slowly, integrating socialist reforms. Now, she had a bit of an elitist view on how this should be done, because she did believe that it was the disciplined elite who would run the state and to guide the mass citizens to a socialist state. And she talks about, converting civil servants, politicians, scientists, and academics. Yeah, we would convert them to socialism through education. But you focus very much on the elite to be the driver, to transform society into a socialist society. Now, what's really important is, so we've looked at revolutionary socialism with Karl Marx. That's one of the strands part of the curriculum. Then obviously we got democratic socialism. Now in the textbook, it refers to as social democracy. And what we see, if we look at the Labour Party, this has been kind of the strong, the strongest strand of socialism has been social democracy in the UK with the Labour Party. Revolutionary socialism, never took hold here, although Karl Marx and other Marxist supporters would have argued that the UK would have been the best place to start a revolution, because it was here where the Industrial Revolution started, but it wasn't the case. So we can say social democracy is the strand which has had the strongest foothold in the UK. And there's three objectives of social democracy. One is a mixed economy. So instead of revolutionary socialism, where everything would be in the public ownership, social democracy want a more mixed economy. So a blend of private and public ownership that stands between free market capitalism and state collectivism. And a really good example from UK politics is Clement Attlee's Labour government from 1945 to 51, where some major utilities industries such as electricity, gas, coal, and as well the steel and railways were nationalized. So they came into public ownership, but the rest, was left in private hands. Another objective when it comes to social democracy is how the economy is managed. So, democratic socialists very much champion a Keynesian way of managing the economy, is that there should be some state intervention in the economy, especially when there is economic crisis. The government should step in, and try to pump money into the economy to keep it going artificially and making sure people stay employed. And then the third one is a welfare state. And we saw Clement Attlee created, the welfare state as we know it today in the UK. The NHS was founded as well, and that's something that Social Democrats very much kind of champion. That the state should. There should be some level of state intervention when it comes to welfare. We need a welfare system in place to try to bridge, the inequality gap between people. And a way to remember social democracy is their belief in welfare from cradle to grave. Okay, so social democracy was very strong in the UK under the Labour Party. However, something started to happen in the 1970s and the 1980s. So we know that we had Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s with the New Right, and Labour Party really struggled. So they kept holding on to this democratic socialism and to the view of having a mixed economy. However, the world society was changing. Now, what happened was as well that we had economic downturn. So we had a global recession early in the 1980s, but already in the 1970s, yeah, there was you know, there was a bit of a crisis in the economy and unemployment started to rise. Now, when unemployment started to rise, this will put an extra burden on the welfare state because the welfare state is dependent on taxes, income from taxes, yeah, including income tax. So when people get unemployed, they won't be able to pay income tax, which helps fund the welfare state. They will actually would need an employment benefit from the welfare state. So not only in the UK, but a lot of in a lot of the Western world, what we saw was kind of a fiscal crisis of the welfare state. So this is where the third way come in. So this last strand within socialism. So again, you can see how the ideology changes, the society changes as things happen. Yeah. So Anthony Giddens is the key thinker we're going to study here. He was the one who coined the third way, which then was adopted by the Labour Party under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Also referred to as New Labour. Yeah. Now, the third way, what it tried to do is to seek to modify left-wing ideas towards the economic and political realities of globalization. So, for instance, Anthony Giddens says that, you know, we can no longer be looking for having this mixed economy with having certain industries owned by having them in public hands, in state hands. Actually, you know, capitalism is here to stay. So, you know, it's nothing we can do about it, but we can still make sure that businesses are acting, yeah, as ethical as possible. So the idea of having any mixed economy, you know, went out of the window. And Tony Blair and the Labour Party also changed the clause 4. They got scrapped the clause 4 of the Labour's constitution, which says that the Labour Party, yeah, their aim was to have common ownership of, you know, industries. So that no longer became a goal of the Labour Party. However, you could still you could ask yourself, well, isn't this then kind of a bit like classical liberalism and a laissez-faire economy, and what has this got to do to socialism? So where we could see that there was still an element of socialism the third way, although it's heavily debatable. And if you get an essay on socialism, it can, you know, very likely be around, yeah, around a socialist view on the economy, which varies a lot between a revolutionary socialist and a third way. You know, a revolutionary socialist wants to get rid of capitalism altogether, and actually a third way socialist would actually say that the market, the free market, has primacy over the state. So where do we still find an element of socialism here? Well, actually, Tony Blair still believed in the concept, you know, of us human beings being social animals, about living in communities, taking care of each other. So really still had that same view on human nature as the earlier socialists. Now, he thought it would be possible to have an enterprise and to have businesses and a capitalist market that could, you know, be fair. And what he looked at was not to create, absolute equality like revolutionary socialism, but what he focused on making sure that everyone has equal opportunities, that there are equal opportunities in society, and it's up to people what they do with that. Now, welfare state will still be there, but because of the fiscal crisis and not being able to afford paying for this welfare state, he said that welfare should only be targeted on the socially excluded, so helping people to help themselves. So if you can remember this, when it comes to social democracy or democratic socialism, they believe in a welfare state from cradle to grave. The third way, however, believe in helping people to help themselves. And also, Tony Blair talked about social inclusion, that everyone should be part and included in society. We will talk about this in much greater detail, but I'm hoping that this lesson have given you at least a bit of an overview of how socialism developed, a brief overview of the 5 core ideas and principles of socialism, which we will go deeper into during next lesson, and a few key thinkers which you'll be covering in the curriculum, which I will go through in much more detail, and as well giving you a brief overview of the 3 different strands of socialism that you need to know of in a kind of historical context.